Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Senate Education. It is Thursday, March 11th at 1:34 p.m. Just a quick overview of the next couple of days. Today we are going to spend time, we're going to return to S100, which is an act relating to universal school breakfasts and lunches. This was sent to us by Senate Ag. And we have until tomorrow to act on it. Doesn't mean that we cannot return to this topic. In fact, I think there may be some questions that we still may need to pull apart on Tuesday and Wednesday, but we do need to act on it in order for this work to continue. We'll also be going to appropriations and finance. We'll then shift to S16, back to the amendment that we started looking at yesterday. And we've invited Mr. Diaz from the ACLU in, as well as Secretary of Education to weigh in on that. That's also something that I'm hoping we can come to an agreement on sometime tomorrow. Then we'll shift to COVID recovery. We're trying to work with assist our friends in appropriations. I've asked Secretary French to come in to give us an overview of where things are at with ESSER funds and how dollars are being used, just so that we all are on the same page. And I'm going to need to talk to the Chair of Appropriations. We don't want to take any steps that would make things more complicated or impact how ESSER funds are distributed. You may also recall that we asked Senate appropriations for an appropriation in the expedited budget bill. So long story short, I need some clarification on the best way to move forward. And we'll be looking to the Secretary, Ms. Morehouse, who is the Executive Director of Vermont After Schools, and our Ledge Council on that. And then finally, we'll return to our draft strike all amendment of S13, which is the pupil weighting factors report implementation. So with that, I also know it's a beautiful day. We have work to do, but I'm hoping that we can finish at a reasonable time so that everybody can get out and take a well-needed, well-deserved break. I would also say, if senators, tomorrow being the last day of crossover, not seeing big problems right now, but if you would please reserve, knowing that we could go later than we usually do. We could go beyond 5 o'clock tomorrow. If you could just keep your schedules open. But again, I feel like we're narrowing in on things, and hopefully we will be able to do our work in a timely, efficient manner. With that, I would like to welcome Faye Mack and Betsy Rosenbluth. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us today, and welcome to Senate Education. We are continuing our work on S100, and we know that Ms. Mack, you are the Education Director with Hunger Free Vermont, and Ms. Rosenbluth, you are with Vermont Feed Project. You're the Project Director, for the Vermont Farm to School Network. So looking forward to hearing from both of you. And unless I see hands from colleagues on the committee, which I don't, we will turn the floor over to the two of you. Ms. Mack.
Great, thank you so much for having us. For the record, my name is Faye Mack. I'm the Advocacy and Education Director at Hunger Free Vermont. And Betsy and I are both really happy to be here today to talk about S100 as a whole. I'm going to start us off and focus in on the universal school meals component of S100, and Betsy is the better expert at the local purchasing incentive and the farm to school and early childhood grant program components. So if that sounds okay. I've also submitted pretty detailed testimony I wanted to just draw your attention to, and know that it was, I just submitted it today, and so it might be something worthwhile to take a look at afterwards, but I'll touch on it a little bit today, but won't kind of read the whole thing or anything. And I also wanted to just take a moment as we start to thank you all for all of the work that this committee has been doing to figure out how to support kids and schools during the pandemic, with especially the work that you've all been doing to help address summer, the gaps in summer, both in terms of programming and nutrition. So we're really excited about some of what's been proposed and coming out. And so I just wanted to thank you for that. There's a lot on your plate this year, and appreciate the attention to that. So as I said, I'd like to just give sort of a kind of general overview and really want to answer questions that you have. I have watched the testimony over the last couple of days that you've received, and so I'm hoping that we can help provide some answers and some clarifications with some of the questions that have come up, and are happy to answer anything that's coming up for you. So I'll share a little bit, and then really am interested in hearing what you all are curious about. So for a little bit of context, I just want to start off by sharing what we're looking at in terms of hunger right now in Vermont. Hunger continues to be at unprecedented levels. We've been seeing higher rates of hunger than we saw during the Great Recession or at any other time in recent history. According to the University of Vermont, about 30% of people in Vermont have faced hunger at some point during the pandemic. During the Great Recession, we peaked at about 14% of Vermonters. So we're facing something that we haven't seen before. And we also know from that study as well that families with children are 2 times more likely to be facing hunger than families without children. So as we are talking about schools and the roles that schools have been playing this year in terms of feeding kids, it's been an incredible life support for children and for their families. The other piece about the pandemic and its impact on hunger that I want to note is that the recovery for families in terms of their economic recovery, their ability to put food on the table, afford housing and basic needs is going to take longer than the health crisis portion of the pandemic. It took Vermont 12 years to return to the rates of hunger that we saw before the Great Recession. That's a very long recovery. And we expect that we'll see a similar, some kind of long recovery again as well for folks. So as we're addressing COVID, part of addressing COVID is creating long-term systems and structures that will help bolster families through the multiple years it will take to recover from the pandemic. And universal school meals is part of that recovery and part of the effort to help end hunger. I think that you've heard a lot over the years probably about why universal school meals is so important. There is some research that's been done both in Vermont and outside of Vermont on universal school meals, because universal school meals has been operating in schools in Vermont and across the country for many years. There are some schools in Vermont that have been providing universal school meals for decades. Many schools started providing universal school meals about 5 or 6 years ago. And so there's some data in my testimony from studies in Vermont and also studies in places like New York City that really address the health and learning and school climate impacts that universal school meals have. Most notably, I just want to point out that universal school meals improves performance in math and English language arts by up to 10 weeks of learning, which is essentially the summer slide that students experience in low-income families. It also has proven to have positive impacts on obesity rates and on school climate. One of the things that schools in Vermont have reported is that universal school meals completely transforms the relationship that administrators have with caregivers and with families, because it removes money from the relationship. Principals are often the debt collectors. And so when they're no longer having to chase down families for school meal debt, families are much more open to building positive relationships and answering the phone when the principal calls and are able to focus on the child and the child's health and well-being. What the other thing that we've learned through the research is that 42% of children who are living in food insecure households in Vermont are not currently eligible for free school meals or 3 Squares Vermont. They live in families who earn too much money. They're above income for those programs. And so we know that as long as we don't have universal school meals in schools, there are children who are going hungry who don't have access to school meals. And so there was some conversation about kind of what school meals look like today. And when I say today, I mean pre-pandemic today, 2019-2020 school year. There were 78 schools in Vermont, both public and independent schools, who were providing universal school meals already. And in those schools, they were not collecting school meal applications. All student participation in school meal programs was higher than in schools without universal school meals. And in the schools that were not providing universal school meals, we know that because of the shame and stigma associated with school meals and the cost of school meals, children who both were eligible for free school meals and those who weren't eligible for free school meals but needed them aren't participating in the meal program. I want to also just touch on how school meals programs are paid for. That was something that I've heard come up a little bit. So school meal programs are paid for by a combination of different funding sources. All schools participating in the federal programs are receiving federal funding. They're receiving some state funding, and then they help pay for their programs through other sources of revenue, which includes the fees that families pay for a full price meal, along with adults eating, catering, selling snacks, and different sources of revenue. For most schools in Vermont, all those sources of funding don't actually cover the full cost of the school meal program. And so the remainder of the school meal program budget is incorporated into the school budget and borne by the education fund. And so that's happening in most schools today. And the universal school meals component of S100 doesn't actually change that. So it keeps the funding structure the same, where after all of the different sources of revenue and the federal dollars that are coming in for the program, anything that's left over in the school meal budget is incorporated into the school budget. I will note that S100 does keep that cost exempt from the excess spending limit, though. And I think I have that phrase right, but I might not. The other thing that I want to just note about universal school meals is that right now any school in Vermont can provide universal school meals by enrolling in one of the federal provisions to do so. So that's how we have the 78 schools who are already providing universal school meals. They're doing so through federal options that allow them, enrolling in a federal option that allows them to provide universal school meals. And that's required in S100, that schools would enroll in those. And that helps ensure that schools are drawing down the maximum amount of federal dollars that they have available to them for the program. What S100 provides schools that they don't currently have is some additional support in making that transition. So S100 includes an additional position with the Agency of Education. And I know you've heard from them at how crucial that position is for their ability to support schools in making that transition. So we're very supportive of that position. And it also provides some one-time funding to help schools offset some of the cost of making this transition to universal school meals. And that might be that a school needs to invest in a new refrigerator or oven to help get ready for the increased school meal participation. They might need a little bit of administrative support to do the paperwork to enroll in the federal program, or they might need some help offsetting some of the cost of just making that transition. And so there's funding available through S100 for that. And that's it. That's not available today for schools. And one of the things that we've heard from the Agency of Education over the past 6 or so months is that a number of schools have reached out to them saying, we love what's happening right now, being able to provide universal school meals. And when these temporary waivers from the USDA end, we don't want to go back to the old model. We want to enroll in the federal options and continue. And without S100, these schools won't have that financial support or the additional capacity at the Agency of Education to help them do that. And finally, the last thing that I want to just note around that is that the bill includes a 5-year transition period, and that's, we think, pretty crucial for schools. Some schools, like the ones who've already reached out to the Agency of Education, are ready to go now and they want to make that transition. And some are going to need a couple of years to get ready to make that transition. And so the bill allows for that time for schools to come as they want to. And it also allows for the impact of the cost of going to universal school meals to be spread out over 5 years, so that the impact sort of grows over time instead of all happening in 1 year, which would, so it's kind of spreads it out in a way that we think is really helpful. And so that's sort of an overview. I also am happy to address the school meal, the forms question around how schools collect income information. If members of the committee are curious about that. And
sure, that would be good. Why don't you do that, and then we
yeah,
can take some questions and pass it on to Ms. Rosenbluth.
Perfect. So in the written testimony that I submitted, I wrote, there's a couple pages about the forms because it has come up as a very rightful concern, as the income information that's collected through school meal applications is really critical for schools. In Vermont, we don't require that information for any state funding, but it is required for federal funding for a number of non-nutrition programs, and that income information is needed for eligibility for other nutrition programs like summer meal programs. It doesn't have to be collected through the school meal application though. And actually moving away from collecting that information through the school meal application creates a huge opportunity for schools to not only collect that data better and with more simple, really hone in on what it is that they need. But it also allows them to reframe the purpose of that information and to create more transparency about why they're asking families to fill out that form and to collect that information. Right now, it's tied to school meals. So if a family doesn't think that they're eligible for school meals, or their children don't want school meals because of the stigma associated with getting a free school meal under the current model, they're not going to fill out the form. But if when schools move away from using the school meal application to collect the form, they can say very clearly, here's a form, it goes home with the same forms as filling out your emergency contacts and the other kinds of forms that families have to fill out every year. And they're able to really say, we need this information to help our community and our school get important federal funding. So we ask everyone to fill it out. And it can be framed in a really positive way whereby filling it out, you're actually helping your school and helping your community. And so the language in S100 right now allows the Agency of Education to create the best practices for doing so. And that is great flexibility, because I think, as they mentioned, they have an interagency work group right now who are working on figuring out what those best practices are. So it allows those best practices to evolve over time and instructs schools to work with the Agency of Education to collect that information. And what we know in the 78 schools who are currently providing universal school meals in Vermont and in other parts of the country is that when schools move to a different way of collecting that information, they aren't seeing broad-based declines in their eligibility for federal funding. It hasn't actually shifted all that much on a whole. So that information is really important. And by moving away from school meal applications, there's actually a pretty exciting opportunity to tackle it in a whole new way.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Mack? It was all very helpful. This is, this was in ag for a while. They worked hard, and we have the opportunity to take a look. Senator Perschlick.
Thank you. Faye, what did you say about the excess spending? I missed that, because I was thinking before, maybe last year, we were talking about this, that we were talking about if they spend more money, like if you offer universal meals, that we would exempt that from the excess spending limit. But I just want missing the context of it here. If it's free, then what the excess spending would be. You know what I mean?
Sure.
If it's part of the statewide education fund.
Sure. So the impact so the way that it works, and Jim, I know that Jim is here and he might be able to clarify exactly how it's written into the bill. But the cost of going to universal school meals will be different for each school as they transition to universal school meals. We estimate that the total impact overall after the 5-year ramp up period will be about $20 to $25 million. And I know you heard the Joint Fiscal Office's fiscal note, which we're really excited about yesterday. And so that's the total impact on the education fund. What it will actually mean for individual schools is dependent on the school meal program and the size of the school, the socioeconomic status of the student population, the kind of the income levels, and a number of other factors about how their school meal program works. So that's where, as schools are developing their school budget and they're looking at their school meal program and the increased investment that moving to universal school meals will cost, that is excluded from the excess spending.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Mack? Ms. Rosenbluth. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Chittenden, please.
So this is a naive question, but I fully support feeding our kids. It's the right thing to do. What I'm struggling with is what Senator Lyons has asked about this a couple of times, which is I feel like we're missing a willingness to pay from families out there that have the capacity to contribute to feeding our children. And so trying to think of coming up with a $20 to $30 million and being sensitive to that. Can you tell me about previous discussions about how you find the middle class and upper class families that do send their kids to public schools, ways to capture what they are able and willing to contribute to cover the collection of monies to provide for universal foods?
Sure. So universal school meals means that no child or their family have to pay for the meal, that it's paid for as part of the way that we are educating our kids. And what we know is that until we hit full universal status, where no single kid is separated because of their household income, we will not see all low income and food insecure children actually eat school meals. There's a big component about the success of the program is the shift in school culture and the shift in the climate in the cafeteria when money is removed from the meals. You start to see children sit at tables with each other who don't normally sit at tables with each other. Children who often say they're not hungry during school lunch suddenly start eating school lunch. We see teachers start to eat more school lunches, which they continue to pay for. And it's part of that shift where we all come together during lunchtime to all eat, because eating nutritious food together is how we learn and how we prepare ourselves to learn. So that's, I think, just important, kind of the foundational piece about what makes universal school meals successful. Families with higher incomes, the way that the education fund works, and I am not an education fund expert, but my understanding is that families with higher incomes are paying higher taxes and are paying more into the education fund. So they are paying for the universal school meals program, and they're paying for school meals through the education fund in the way that we're paying for the program. So rather than have families pay that in their taxes and also have to send money to the school for an individual meal, it's incorporated. So we are still having, the weight on how much each family is contributing into the school budgets and into the school meal programs does still mean that higher income families are paying more.
Please continue.
Just as a quick follow-up, I get that. That makes sense. I'm a big proponent of rational taxation, a rational assessment. And it seems reasonable to me to have those that are benefiting from the free foods that can afford it to pay something into it. Whereas what you just described is really everybody with high incomes, not necessarily children. Again, I'm fully supportive of feeding our kids. It's what we need to do. I'm just wondering if there's a way to find this financial amount, this $20 to $30 million, tapping into the families of middle and upper income that are benefiting from these universal school meals. But that's a discussion for the Finance Committee and not necessarily here.
And I would just add, keeping in mind, anybody can amend a bill at any time and in any committee. Senator Terenzini, please.
Thank you, Senator Campion and Faye. Ms. Mack, I appreciate very much your testimony. I really love the idea of feeding all of our students. The thing I come back to, and I was gently reminded yesterday that we're not the Appropriations Committee. I get it, but the part that I come back to is the $24 to $40 million a year. Secretary French said 50 million the other day. That is a huge price tag on the taxpayers and businesses of Vermont. And I just don't know how I can go back to my constituents of Rutland County and say that I know that many of you are struggling. I know many of your businesses haven't been open in the last year consistently because of the pandemic, but I just voted to raise the overall tax burden of Vermonters $25 to $50 million. And that's where I'm hung up on this concept. To me, maybe it's not the right time to address this because of everything else we have going on in our state right now. So I'm really hung up on, I like the concept. I'm just really hung up on the portion of how expensive this is going to be to the average hardworking Vermonter. So if you have any insights in how I can sell it to my constituents, I'd love to hear it, because it just isn't settling well with me right now.
Sure. It is, I won't discount the cost. 20 million, 30 million, it's a significant investment in our students. And it's a small portion of the overall education fund. So I see both of those as impacts as we're talking about the cost. I will also say that Hunger Free Vermont and our partners are working very hard to help make to have this paid for more broadly by the federal government. So there are a lot of opportunities right now to change the way that school meals are paid for, and eligibility into these different, how these different provisions that schools enroll in for the federal provisions for universal school meals, how the funding structure works, so that because the federal government is paying for the school meal program as well. And moving to universal school meals, I will also just note that we expect after the 5-year ramp up period, about a $10 million a year increase in the federal dollars that are coming in for the program. That doesn't offset the state investment, but there will be more federal dollars coming in for the program as well, because we'll be feeding 65% more meals every day. We'll see a big increase. The other thing too, I would just say is that many schools are already making this decision. So the Rutland City School District, for example, provides universal school meals, and they're enrolled in these federal provisions, as are a number of others. But I know Senator Terenzini, that's part of the community that you represent. And additionally, the Slate Valley Union School District is a really good example of a school district who have gone ahead and made this investment already. So it costs the Slate Valley School District an increased investment in order to provide universal school meals, and their communities have decided that it's worth it in their school budget. So we are seeing this, this already happen. And what we know is that there are schools that want to do this, and there are school districts that will continue to build toward universal school meals. And this legislation helps provide some support for that, and some financial support, and ensures that all schools eventually get there, so that we don't end up with 10% of Vermont kids without access to school meals because they happen to live in a couple of zip codes where they don't have universal school meals, and it's really truly equitable access. But I don't want to discount what your concern, Senator.
Senator Lyons. Senator Terenzini, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you, but I wanted to thank Faye for the nice explanation.
Great. Senator Lyons, please.
Okay, thank you. As we're going along, some of the guardrails that you have talked about that are in place are a little bit more reassuring about ensuring equitable treatment across the board. So let me be clear that right now there are 78 schools enrolled in the federal program that provides dollars for free meals for kids. Is that
So,
Yes.
so most schools in Vermont are enrolled in the National School Breakfast and National School Lunch Program, and that provides federal dollars to support school meals under a paid and free and reduced model. And then 78 schools in Vermont are enrolled in the federal provisions within those programs that allow them to provide universal school meals.
Okay, and once all schools are enrolled in that program, which is mandated in the bill, then what will the need be? What will be the residual need for
Yeah.
for meals? Good. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to make sure I understand your questions, Caroline. Do you mean the need for students or the financial need?
Yes, both. I mean,
Okay. So we estimate in terms of, so 100% of children are not going to eat school meals on a given day. What we have seen in schools in Vermont who have been providing universal school meals over the last number of years is that, and I'm pulling up the numbers right now, they're the same numbers that the Joint Fiscal Office is using. It's about 60% of students eating school breakfast and 75% of students eating school lunch. And so the impact of all schools moving to universal school meals is about 18,000 more kids eating school lunch on any given day in Vermont, and about 23,000 more kids eating school breakfast on any given day. We see a bigger increase in breakfast. There's a lot more room to grow within school breakfast. So that's a bit of a sense of kind of how many children we expect to be eating school meals. There will always be families who choose to send meals to school, and that's totally fine. The idea is that this is available. School meals are available to kids if they want them,
Okay.
and then it's coupled with the work that Betsy can talk about around local purchasing and farm to school, which really help improve school meal quality and get more kids excited about school meals. And we see participation increase there as well.
So then another question that I'm not sure where this question lands, but as we've been looking at the weighting study, and free and reduced lunch is a part of that decision making within weights for kids, and I'm wondering that will still be an issue. Low economic families will still be an issue, but it will not. I don't see how it can then be related. I'm going to have to change that. That's all I'm saying.
That's part of collecting the income information from students using a different form that's not tied to school meals.
Yes.
And that's what the 78 schools who are currently providing universal school meals, they're doing that now and providing that data for things like weighting.
Okay, because one of the concerns that I heard from one of my school districts, which has is fairly affluent and has a high median income, and that was my question. Not my question, but our question in our discussion was how to use maybe a regional median income or some other value as part of the weighting process.
And I don't know enough about the weighting to really answer
none of us
that.
do. We're all
Yeah.
changing it anyway, so it doesn't matter.
What I do know is that for federal funding, there's some specific data that's needed. I imagine the state has flexibility in determining what data they use for their own calculations.
Yeah, I mean, certainly food and nutrition is critical to success in school. There's no question about it. But we also know that socioeconomic status is extremely powerful in achievement. So I'm just wondering what our measurement will be going forward. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Rosenbluth, would you like to add some new information to this conversation? Things that the committee doesn't know that you believe is important for us to know?
Thank you, Chair. The Farm to School Network believes that S100 will make a substantial impact on COVID recovery in the state, as well as the health of Vermont's kids and farmers. It's a win-win, as I think we're all talking about. preventing kids from going hungry, supporting families, benefiting the economy and Vermont farmers. I mean, we invest so much now to support the education of our kids, and we know that hungry kids cannot bring their best to the classroom. And I think in addition to what Faye has been talking about, in schools with universal meals, we have seen a decline in nurse visits, behavior interventions, better attendance. There's a lot of factors that you have to address one way or another. And we've seen both in Vermont and in places like New York City that has universal meals, some really compelling data about the positive impact. If you think about it, over half a child's daily nutrition can come from school meals. And as we mentioned, Farm to School just improves that participation and the excitement around school meals in general. With the local purchasing incentive and the Farm to School aspects of the bill, we have wide support from school nutrition directors who are squeezed to provide a nourishing lunch for something close to $1.20 a plate to cover the food costs. So an incentive that increases what the programs have in their budget to spend on local food, even 15 cents, really makes a huge difference in making that decision whether they're going to buy a local apple or local dairy or even local beef. Schools overall have been spending $15.5 million every year on food, and we just want to capture more of those dollars to stay in Vermont. So the bill has a goal of 20% Vermont food, Vermont products, and that would translate to over $3 million annually going directly to Vermont producers, or almost $5 million contributed to Vermont's economy. And the program, as Senator Pearson mentioned, has been very successful in other states. New Mexico, Michigan, New York, Oregon have all done some version, and we've been able to talk to our colleagues and benefit from some of the lessons learned. And that's the design of the program that you see. We've worked on it for over a year with AOE's Child Nutrition Program, and it creates an on-ramp for schools to put systems in place for local purchasing, and it gives AOE child nutrition staff a year before they're distributing the incentive grants. And both the Agency of Agriculture and the Farm to School Network are ready to help schools and AOE with success of the program. Last thing I just want to note is that we are asking you to fully fund the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants Program at $500,000 to meet the goal of supporting Farm to School and early childhood across the state in every community. And we know that 90% of our brains are developed by age 5, so it is just so critical that our young children have access to good nutrition and are exposed to healthy new foods when their tastes are developing. And I think especially right now with the rates of food insecurity that Faye referred to. The technical assistance that's provided through the grants program helps schools work towards universal school meals, improving nutrition, increasing local purchasing. All of these elements in the bill work together to create change that supports schools to benefit the kids. And I think I'll just stop there. If there's any questions on those aspects of the program, I'm happy to answer that.
Any questions? We are continuing our conversation on this topic tomorrow with members of the Agency of Education and school personnel. But this has been very helpful. Senator Lyons.
Right. No, so thank you, Betsy. This is, and Faye, but both of you, this is really, it's been comprehensive and I really appreciate it. In terms of the sort of the getting the fresh foods and farm to school piece, so how will that be administered? That's number one. Is that all going to be a local administration process? And do we have a a purchasing pool that we use to purchase foods from our local farms and distribute them broadly across the state, trying to figure that out a little bit. And then that's it for now.
Mhm. Now, those are excellent questions. There is a buying group cooperative with the independent food service directors, and they have a contract with a broadline distributor. And with this program, they would be working with Reinhardt, who has that contract right now, to make sure that it's very clear the Vermont foods on that truck that the school nutrition directors can purchase and can track and can use as part of the program. Schools also really like to buy directly in their own community, if they're farms or bakeries or whatever that might be. And sometimes they have that direct relationship where they'll do a direct buy. And there's food hubs across the state that are offering Vermont food, Food Connects, Green Mountain Farm Direct. So that's a third way that schools have a contract with those food hubs to deliver, to their loading dock Vermont products. So it varies, but there's opportunities where schools are not reinventing the wheel or trying to figure out. We do provide a fair amount of technical assistance to make sure that all their bid documents follow all the rules and regulations, and connect with farmers if they want that connection. So they have some support. 90% of schools are buying at least something. It might just be Vermont apples or some Vermont dairy. And so this is an incentive to greatly expand some of what is happening. And I would say the food service management companies like the Abbey Group and Cafe Services, they also are on board and excited about this. So they have figured out as well a way to be purchasing local.
Thank you. I just, as you're talking through this, and I remember my first session, I was vice chair of agriculture, and Senator Cattell from Franklin County brought in I think it was Jen Boucher from the Agency of Agriculture. I think it was a department then. And we talked about how we could get food from farms to kids at school. And so started, talking about all of this so long ago, but you have taken it to such a great in such a great direction. So thank you both for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Please stay in touch as we make our way through this. As I said, we do need to take a vote tomorrow, one way or the other, but we may continue testimony next week to see, since it has a ways to go still in 2 other committees, which would allow us to get more information in case the committee does want to propose any kinds of amendments. So thank you both.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Diaz.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you all?
Good, thanks. Good to see you.
Interesting discussion. Very nice to be here.
You have been with us before on S16. You've been one of the big proponents over the past several years with Senator Sears and others on this. You have seen an amendment that we are putting forward, and we started to look at the amendment yesterday, and we I think overall there were some questions. So wondering if you might just say a few words, having seen the amendment, support for it, concerns, suggestions that you might have, and then we can have a dialogue with you.
Happily. So just a few words. The amendment, the ACLU of course supports the amendment. We are very interested in not only having data about school discipline, or at least allowing this commission to have the data that it needs to do the job that the legislature is asking it to do. But but to ensure that all categories and things that are typically where we find disparities in school discipline are at their fingertips, and not just that information, but that it can be analyzed in a way that is that allows the commission to really figure out like where are the connections, and that's the section about being cross-tabulated. So it's we support the amendment. It adds a few key things to make sure that a few key data points to make sure that the commission has the information that it needs to do its work. Without this information, we think that the commission is going to be at a deficit, and so we're hopeful that this information can be provided to them. Most of this information is available and has been available in previous Agency of Education reports on school discipline that I mentioned in my last testimony. They did 2 to this committee in 2016 and 2017 that included most, if not all, of the information that this amendment seeks to include as well. And I'll stop there. I apologize that I was not able to watch yesterday's review of the amendment, but I look forward to answering your questions if I can.
No problem at all. Thanks for being here. That's very helpful. Questions following up on yesterday's discussion. Senator Perchlik?
No, I don't have any specific language, but it sounds like Mr. Diaz is supportive of the bill as amended, which was one thing I was just wondering of, because I think it's a little different than if you were to go through from his report, kicked out, I think it was called, or that the things that was recommended in there, we might not be doing all those. We're kind of taking an intermittent step, but it looks like we're going in the direction that was recommended. So I just confirming that he feels that we're following the reports that were issued in the past.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes, I think we're supportive of the bill as a step forward. We certainly hope that the commission, and we'll tell this to the commission if they bring people in, or for a part of it, that there are certain things that we hope to see recommended in accordance with what the data is telling us. We agree that gathering data and having stakeholders at the table is important to actually coming up with meaningful solutions. So, I think it's a great first step down the road towards really addressing the disparities in exclusionary discipline in our schools.
Senator Hooker, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Diaz. One of the concerns about the amendment was about the collection of data at small schools and disaggregating the data and therefore kind of exposing personally identifiable information. Can you talk about that and maybe ways to get around that, or do you see that as a problem or not? Thanks.
So as a ACLU attorney, we are very cognizant of privacy concerns, of course, as a organization that fights for the right to privacy in a number of fronts. On this issue, we think that I'm at least not seeing a major privacy concern. I'm aware of FERPA, and it is a complex and somewhat labyrinthine law, I'll say. It is never really clear to me, how exactly it applies when you're talking about just data points. However, my thinking was that this is just data that's going to the commission. Not all of it has to be released to the public. And so it's still within a state apparatus or a state entity. So hopefully that would handle some of those issues. I think the Agency of Education's lawyers will do everything they can to make sure that they're not violating FERPA. But my hope is that the commission can have all the information it needs in order to make decisions that make sense for the entire state. I hope that, I know that's not maybe a full answer to the question, but I hope it's useful.
Thank you.
Senator Lyons, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. This is very helpful. I think yesterday we did talk about the data collection, the disaggregation, and what that little section actually meant. But I do have another question about the categories that are listed here for data collection. And understanding that you're trying to get at the variables that might contribute to a greater disciplinary actions for some kids over others. And and knowing that tiered support and PBI are related to mitigating against social determinants. And I'm wondering if there was any thought to including any of that sort of epidemiological analysis of family situation, exposure to drugs, a single parent home, that kind of information that is very informative when children have behavioral problems, and including this kind of discipline. So knowing that there is a strong interest in understanding the racial disparities or gender differences and so on, but was there any thought about, or could there be some thought about some of these other areas?
I think there certainly could be some thought about them. My understanding of the amendment or the categories in the amendment is that those are categories that schools traditionally track. So, and that's why they were included. And so I'm not sure, and because schools, as we all know, do a lot of data collection. And so this was trying to mirror some of that. And again, it also, if the data is not there for some of these things, it may cause the commission to make recommendations about what additional data needs to be gathered if possible. But yeah, my understanding is at least the data that's currently there gives it.
I know we might currently be collecting all the data and we might not actually be getting down to the exact information that is going to help us understand how to change the direction. So I don't know, maybe is there a way to add something in here about exploring new data categories without defining those, maybe related to social determinants, something like that?
Certainly. I mean, I think that's something the commission, that you all could add, and that the commission could be tasked with.
You want to work on some language, Senator Lyons, with Mr. Desmarais?
Yeah,
See if we can bring it to us tomorrow.
Okay, we'll do that.
That sounds okay.
As long as Jim is willing to help me, I'm glad to do it.
Always.
Okay.
Always there. Any other questions for Mr. Diaz? Okay. Thank you, Jay.
Great. No, thank you all for your work on this bill and the many others. There's a lot. You're all very busy, so I really appreciate the work that's been going on, especially in terms of equity issues this session.
Thank you. And we know how to reach you and where to reach you if we run into any other questions. So, Senator Hooker, before we go, you're on the floor with this probably Tuesday. Any other questions from you?
Not right now, but I would like to talk with Jim and maybe with Senator Lyons as crafting more language for the amendment and just get some clarification on, what we expect from the amendment.
Can I, maybe Please. I could add something. I'm looking at the, on page 3 of the proposal that we have in between the yellow. And it does say recommend changes to the types of data collected and data collection processes. So I'm wondering if we could include in there something about data collection related to the contribution of social determinants, something like that, to suspensions and expulsions. Something, just so it's there. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be fully explicit or a big deal, but a little something to move it along.
Jim, do you need any other language besides that from Senator Lyons?
I don't. That's very clear.
And I don't see any objections to adding something like that. And Senator Lyons, if this were to pop up as a question in any way on the floor, we'll look to you to.
Sure, Senator Hooker will be really good at
There's
responding.
no
Senator
question.
Lyons will coach me beforehand.
There's no question about that. And great. Anything else before we move on to Secretary French's eyes and comments on this amendment? And Mr. Diaz, if you're able to stay on, we would welcome that. Thank you for your help. Thank you for your support. And we may be calling on you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be here.
Thanks. Secretary French, good afternoon. Very much appreciate you coming in. We know you're equally as busy this time of year, being pulled in all sorts of directions. We are continuing our work on S16, which is in appropriations, and where we're hoping to get their support. We appreciate all the work you've already done on S16 and your support in moving in this direction. We do have an amendment that I know was shared with you where we, the Pro Tem and Senator Hardy came to a few of us asking to disaggregate some of this data. And we've heard from our Ledge Counsel, Mr. Diaz at the ACLU, and now eager to hear your thoughts on this. So with that, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. I have not seen the amendment, so I just received the invitation to testify about an hour ago. So I'm unfamiliar with what's being proposed. I apologize. I couldn't find it on your website.
The apology is mine. I'm just looking to see if our committee assistant, Ms. Lowell, might have it for us, or might it be on the website?
It is there.
It is there.
It's under S16. I don't think it's on today's document.
Probably on yesterday's document.
I don't know where.
See if I can find it.
I can change it.
Can you put it on today's?
Yep.
Thanks, Jeannie. While we're doing this, I can just mention a little bit, Mr. Secretary, what we're trying to do is specify and collect, what kind of data are we looking for? Our concerns, and I know you share them around, our students from the BIPOC community, our disabled students, our other students, who is experiencing these suspensions and expulsions. We're trying to get information, more specific information that will inform this commission as it moves to do this work. And gathering data and having this data in front of stakeholders and those involved, we feel I don't want to speak for the committee. I feel like we're leaning in that direction of finding that to be an important thing.
Yeah, I'm still having trouble finding the amendment.
Because it takes a while for the system to load it.
Secretary French has sent it to you by email too, so.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'll look for it there. Yeah, I got it there. Thanks.
If you want to take a moment and go off screen, Secretary French, and read it, we are happy to take a quick 5-minute stretch.
No, I can read it pretty quickly. And when you say amendment, so this is, I'll just read through.
The yellow.
Yep.
So much for the stretch. problem with having such a smart and talented Secretary of Education.
Yeah, well, no, I wouldn't go that far. Yeah, so you're specifying the disaggregation. That's what I'm picking up on.
That's correct.
Yeah. All data was disaggregated by minimum following subgroups. This shall be cross-tabulated by so this is prescribing some reporting format, basically, is how I view it. Is that fair? Let's see. And
Yep.
the task force shall make to end suspensions. Okay, define this by best practice, compile available data and the data collection regarding suspensions. Total number of this total. Yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem with that. It's, my concern, just to reiterate previously, I've read through this whole thing now, was about prescribing data elements, I'll call them, that, that might or might not exist in the federal data dictionary. So I don't see that concern here from what I'm reading. It's certainly, I think, appropriate to have a group make recommendations to improve data collections if they're insufficient. And I know that claim was made in the earlier version of the draft, which I think is totally appropriate. I was concerned about that group then defining what those data elements were or should be without, they certainly could make recommendations in that regard, but to actually do it I think is problematic. And my other concern was that they would also be involved in the collection of the data. What I read here is more about reporting, making sense of the information and making recommendations. So there's nothing here I think that would be problematic from the agency standpoint. I think the reporting format would be improved because I know that's been an issue. But we certainly also, as I make the point last time, if the reporting systems that we have or the collections that we have are deemed to be insufficient for Vermont purposes, then we should endeavor to create new data collections. But it needs to be acknowledged, firstly, that there is a world, a universe of data elements out there. And I know Vermont's a very special and unique place, but I find it hard to imagine that there aren't somehow already defined in that larger data dictionary the elements that we would find useful. And I think I circulated to you anyway, Senator Campion, the report that the AOE was asked to do in 2017 on this issue on exclusionary disciplines. It sort of talked about some of the data elements that are available in the small n size and so forth. But I think as amended, this is an improvement to the concerns that I had previously.
Okay.
And I've circulated written testimony to you as well.
Yeah, no, yeah. Appreciate that. And we can go back and
I would just underscore the point too, that I'm willing as secretary, as any secretary should, to be held accountable for the data reporting requirements. That is one of the essential responsibilities of the secretary.
Right.
And the General Assembly should expect and query the agency to produce reports and so forth. My earlier concern was like you were setting up another group to have responsibility over specific data collection. And that's just one of those contributing factors that undermines our capability to actually do what we're supposed to do. If we're not doing something well, then you should expect us to do it better, but to add on some other group at cross purposes actually distracts us from doing what is an essential requirement of our function.
Right. Mr. Diaz, while you're here, and Mr. Desmarais, any concerns or questions, committee members, of course, first and foremost, as we can just have a conversation about this as we're at this stage. Jim.
I just want to address the comment earlier from Senator Hooker about concerns about privacy. The language does say subject to state and federal privacy laws. So it would not allow the release of information even to the task force if that release would violate federal or state privacy laws.
Okay. Questions? Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate it very much. I don't know if you're able to stay on with us for a little bit. We are going to just take a quick break until 2:45 and return, and would love to just have 15 minutes of your time to talk about what we've been talking a lot about this session, and that is sort of COVID recovery.
Yeah, sure. I think my schedule's good till 3, so I'll
Great. Okay,
look
so
forward
let's
to having that conversation.